It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is Adam Dreece. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Oh, you're very welcome. So, as for your introduction, you write young adult fiction, but we have only talked very briefly. So, if you could introduce yourself, that'd be very helpful.
Sure, no problem. So, let's see. I've got 3 different series, but I started my career back in 2014 as an indie author. I was one of those people who, like a lot of folks, just kind of dreamed about being an author one day. But then I was hit with a couple of bouts of real medical fun, leaving me in a lot of pain, and then giving me severe asthma. And as I started to pull my life back together from that, I decided, you know what? It's not going to be someday. It's going to be now. And I kicked off my Yellow Hood series, which is steampunk meets fairy tales made real. So you got like that adventure and inventions and, secret societies pulled out of rhymes and whatnot. And then I started up my Wizard Killer series, which is high action post-apocalyptic fantasy. And then I also put out a sci-fi novel. So along the ways, I went from being a software architect to full-time author and stay-at-home dad. I've made a point of, learning as much as I can along the way and then giving back as much as I can, both in terms of my time to up-and-comers and other indies.
Cool. And I appreciate you having a chat with me because it sounds like you're quite busy these days with a lot of stories and such.
Yeah. So right now scrambling to get one book finished that I really should have finished up a couple of weeks ago, but I was driving around doing all kind of conventions and book signings for the past 3 months. And then there's another novel I've got to get done in the next 6 weeks if I'm going to hit my deadline. So yeah, no problem. And kids at home for Christmas vacation. What could possibly go wrong?
Yes. So you also, so young adult is a big question for me because I've written a little bit of young adult. I read this one book out, Rem's Dream, which I was working on that as a young adult project for, but I'm not really sure. I don't know if I could write young adult again. I'm still thinking about it. And I'm not, because it's just such a challenge, in certain ways.
It's kind of funny. I was having this talk with a friend of mine a couple of months ago, and I think some of us just are, we've got kind of that Boy Scout branding deep inside. And if you hear my kids trying to copy curses I've said, you'll hear them yelling sherbert or darn or, all those kind of things with all the veracity of, a piece right out of Deadpool, but just with, the wrong wording. So, and part of me in my love for YA, I really think about 2 separate groups of audience. I really think not just about the kids and potentially like the advanced readers among them, but I really am thinking about the adults and wanting to give stories that can capture their hearts and minds as well without kind of smashing them up against the wall and leaving them emotional wreckage at the end. So I want to give the complexity and the engagement. I can do all the subtext talking to my adult audience. And I love the idea that my kids, like my daughter in particular, she was 9 years old when I started the Yellow Hoods. I wanted her to read that book as she, that series, I should say, as she went from like 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and then be able to revisit it as an adult and realize this was only masquerading as a kid-friendly series from the get-go. So maybe it's part of my, my evil villainous side on the inside. It's like, oh, that's what you thought it was about? But that idea of having that read that talks up and not down to an audience potentially as young as 9 or 12, for me, it's both a fun challenge and a rewarding experience.
Cool. Yeah, I guess I didn't approach YA as really being that different when I did it, and maybe that was my problem. I mean, I didn't see it as a unique challenge, partially because I was a good deal younger then when I actually wrote most of the books I considered YA, and my audience is probably tired of me saying this, but as a reminder that I'm still not all that old myself. So, yeah. Anyway. So I have another question for you about the young adult genre, and specifically, as I'm correct in saying you're an independent author, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And I've heard that that's a challenge and I've experienced that challenge a little bit. Maybe. I mean, I'm not sure if my book would have taken off more if it was not young adult, but definitely I've had more trouble with the one young adult book I've released than with the other ones.
Well, I mean, one of the big challenges.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, one of the big challenges, I think, is that when you're writing YA, like I've had with my Yellow Hood series, versus when I'm out on the road, pushing paper, the paperback copies. One of the big challenges is that part of that audience, that whole younger audience, they're not really buying ebooks, right? They don't have the credit cards to be able to kind of order on Kindle. And yes, some families kind of do organize it, but they also have a much stronger relationship with paper. And even the adults who read YA, I find a lot of them still have this love affair with paper. So yeah, it can be a bit challenging. But on the other side, my Wizard Killer series, which is much more high action, I call it my binge book. And my critics call it like Mad Max meets Lord of the Rings. That's the level of engagement with it. It sells extremely well online, as well as in paper. So I think sometimes it's about the kind of stories that you're telling within the YA realm, and how much is your audience really on the kids' side of YA, and how much is it on the adults' side of YA.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I never thought about that factor of the two audiences that approach the one genre, the one label. But that gives me a little bit more to chew on there as far as what I can do with future books in that age range kind of thing. So you've written a couple series, and it's interesting. I currently do not have any series out. I have one book that is a sequel, but no real series. How long is your Yellow Hood series for starters here?
So I've got 5 books in the series. And the first one is about 40,000 words. So it's a slimmer volume. It almost feels like a prequel to the rest of the series. And then all the rest of them are about 70,000 words. It came out over the period of about 2.5 years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty reasonable time frame to kind of get 5 books out. But I guess I'm just intrigued by how how much effort must go into the work, because you wrote 300,000 words in this series or so, over that, in fact. So I guess my question is, do you think? I mean, do you think that's a decent investment because of your time and effort as far as return if you're trying to make some kind of profit? I should have probably asked you what your goal is with your writing in the first place, because not every writer is trying to replace a day job of income or whatever.
Mm-hmm. But I get your point. It's like if you're going to write 300,000 words, would you be better off as writing it as a series, as a set of standalone novels, or would you be better off writing them as a series? Or is that kind of where your question is going?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that, people like to get emotionally invested in a world. And the standalone novel can be great, but it gives you a limited amount of investment. Also, as the author, you're doing a significant amount of investment to create that world. And then you don't really get to capitalize on it or the characters you've created and whatnot. So for me to be able to create that world, set the stage, and then have 2 kind of arcs going on. One is the arc within the book that itself, but another is to be able to have that longer term vision of what am I doing with the world and those characters over a set of novels. So I can kind of make it get deeper and more profound. And that's what allows me in the Yellow Hoods to go from the first pages of book one, really almost feel like, a little kid's book. But as you kind of creep through the story of just even that first book, it kind of gets a little bit more menacing, and you start to feel that maybe the audience intent is kind of shifting. But then by book two, I'm bringing you into a much darker place. And then by book three, I'm really able to kind of give a massive payoff. So one of those benefits is that I don't have to keep reintroducing the characters from scratch. I don't have to rekindle that investment. Now, on the downside is if people don't like your entry point into your series, then they're not going to be coming down for the rest of it. In my particular case, one of the ways that I kind of measure whether or not my series was connecting with people is the number of kids and adults who would show up to events with yellow hoods on. Right? They've made a cloak, they've shown it, or they sent me a photo. They sent me encouraging words. I've got to watch how much that series really meant to people. And when I started this, I really didn't know which way I should go in terms of that. Should I just do standalones, or should I do this kind of epic that really builds, and where the fifth book really closes out some elements of the story all the way back to book one? But I'm really glad I did. It pushed me both as a writer, because even if you're writing a 150,000 word tome, but it's a standalone, there's only so far you can go with the characters in the world and whatnot without overwhelming your reader. Mm-hmm. But if I split that apart, and now it's effectively a 300,000 word or 400,000 word adventure, where I've got these natural breakpoints, which are the end of those novels, for you to be able to kind of stop and take a rest. We can go to some pretty darn cool places. And with my Wizard Killer series, which are, a lot more on the novella side, they're short and sweet, but I really channeled that whole idea of binge TV shows. So rather than chapters where that can let you breathe, I have these tight episodes that let you, gasp at best. I treat them as TV seasons, and I actually call book one season one, and book two season two, and right now I'm working on season three. I really followed that formula and allow you to get, again, that deeper investment into what's going on, and connecting with the reader.
That's interesting. I've heard of several other authors who do the seasons and the season approach for a series rather than calling them, not step book one or whatever. And I think that's intriguing. I have done a few serials here and there on my website. So, but those ended up becoming huge. I mean, in the one case, or very short in the other cases. So they're either short stories, or the one serial 10 Layers, which grew to be over 100,000 words long on a single book, basically. So I think, I don't know. I'm just musing about that. The approach is different to produce a very different effect, so it makes sense. Mm-hmm. However, I do have another question about the series, and that approach is: at what point do you start thinking about how the series is going to end? In the case of, say, Yellow Hoods.
So it was early on in the second book. I had an idea of where I wanted to land. I call it landing the plane. Like the first book and the second book, you can kind of just getting more air, but there's one point where you just can't keep increasing complexity and reaching, making the story more and more and more broad. You've got to be able to kind of bring it all back in and land satisfactorily. So it was probably about halfway through that I had a good idea. I wasn't sure exactly if that was going to be 3 books, 5 books, 7 books. As I got through book 3, the ending just was getting reinforced, and I was starting to see more plot points for it. But it wasn't until I was writing, I started writing book 4, that I realized I was going to end it after 5 books. that the ideas I had for kind of a book 6, 7, and 8 were kind of like going to just draw things out unnecessarily. And so that was a point where I figured, okay, I think this is going to be ending. And what it allowed me to do is put moments in books 4 and 5 that just hit a lot harder than I would have been willing to do if there were a couple more books to go. And one of the things that I did do is I even say at the back of book 5 that at this point I'm actually going to be doing spin-offs, and that's one of the things I've got to get done. I'm hoping to be able to release it in late spring, but it's the first book that's in the Yellow Hoods world, uses a couple of the secondary characters, but that series is going to have a different feel.
Okay. Yeah, so it's still going to be YA, though, even though it's a different feel?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm very much approaching the same audience because we've already established that YA is more than one audience.
Yeah.
So cool.
One of the things that I've done, one of the things that I did is like my Yellow Hood series speaks to, the Rick Riordan fans, and I don't want to use Harry Potter because it's just so overused, but those kind of like adventure, in particular, stories with strong women, and people who like fairy tales and inventions. So those all go there. And what I decided is I took the risk in my career to also establish a different audience with The Wizard Killer, and again, that kind of like high action, borderline science fiction meets fantasy type of world, that kind of Logan gunslinger feeling. And then I did do a standalone sci-fi novel establishing a future setting with my Man of Cloud 9. And so that was, between those three, I really kind of showed three different sides of myself. And what I found I attracted was three really different audiences. Of course, now whom I'll have to feed with their own books. So I'm not necessarily sure that was a brilliant idea. But I figured one clear way to solve this is by setting up another universe for late next year, which is already in the works. Okay.
And is that other universe sort of an idea that will bring these two together? Is that kind of the
So it's going to be an all new series in the same way that my Yellow Hood series was, and so that's going to be fantasy meets space opera. But actually, what true fans will be able to see is this is actually thousands of years before my Wizard Killer series. So I like that idea of that kind of story architecture having connections while still being able to have stories that are entirely fresh.
Yeah, I understand that a lot. I like the idea of a story universe that's bigger than even one series. I think that's awesome. I obviously have yet to do anything along those lines myself, but yeah. So, if I may be so bold as to ask, has writing taken away your reading time? This is kind of my later part of the interview, because I have found reading becomes very difficult as a writer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as a dyslexic, I have, it's not that often that I'll read fiction. It's more that I would read nonfiction. I read a lot of news articles and whatnot, but there's patterns that you always find in those, so you can speed read those. So my amount of reading time is already somewhat limited. And then you add taking care of 3 kids, trying to write like a nutcase and manage your own indie author career. And what you're left with, I think it's technically 8 minutes a month. Or something.
So you do not read a lot of fiction. I understand. That makes sense.
Yeah. I'd love to. I watch. I try to get a lot of my sources of new ideas and whatnot, and particularly being a very visual person, through watching different kind of shows and targeted movies to try to inspire to inspire me.
Hey, what kind of stuff are you thinking about here? If I can ask that.
Sure. Well, Netflix and I are really good friends, and whether that means watching The Punisher on one side and contrasting its feel and mood and tone and pacing and the relationships of the characters versus something like a Jessica Jones, or watching one of my favorite movies, and I was really skeptical when my wife told me we needed to sit down and watch Mr. Right. But just Sam Rockwell, who's in that with Anna Kendrick, I think it is. The quirkiness and the cheekiness in that movie and the offbeatness, I love it. And then whenever I'm about to write more Wizard Killer, it always has to kick off with John Wick to bring me to that, because the Wizard Killer's written first person. So to give me that kind of mindset, that kind of darkness and feel. So, I bounce around, but as just a short set of examples, I'll go to watch these shows for the dialogue, for how things are framed, for the pacing, and we also watch Nashville, for example, and I feel bad for my wife because every now and then I have to stop whatever we're watching if where it's going is far too evident. And then that's usually where I get the look and I kind of blurt out what I think is about to happen. And then we see that it happens. But again, apologize in advance, or apologies to my wife for all that. But some people turn to books to be able to watch their imagination come to life in new and different ways. And, maybe it's in part being a dyslexic and highly visual that I get a lot when I'm watching TVs and movies, and those will just help kick off my imagination in different directions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you strictly have to consume fiction, text as a writer to learn story stuff and to be inspired. Obviously, there's plenty of ways that. And obviously the TV and movies, if that works for you, that makes perfect sense. So, yeah. But it looks like I've run out of questions, and so if you go on.
There's one thing I'd like to put in, and if you don't mind, one of the things that I do as an author, and one of the things that we have going on right now, every Christmas. I connect up with a local charity and raise money for them, as well as raise awareness. And we've got a current campaign going on called Books for a Good Claus, spelled CLAUS, like Santa Claus. So booksforgoodclaus.com. And we're raising funds and awareness for a charity called Kids Phone Line. Kids Help Phone. My apologies. And they provide this excellent service for kids who are either in really stressful situations, they need somebody to turn to, or even if they're home alone and don't know how to cook the mac and cheese and kind of nervous on that front. And this year I've teamed up with a YA romance author who's a very good friend. She's got this amazing series called the Foundation series called. And I think you've spoken to her before, Susie Vidori.
Oh yes, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so Susie and I have this going on from December 3rd until the 23rd, and it's where people can order our books off of booksforgoodclaus.com, and we're giving $5 for every book sold to Kids Help Phone, and for anybody who's outside of the Calgary or Alberta area, we are shipping books to the U.S. and Canada. But also on my website, adamdreece.com, I've got a blog post that does connect you with phone numbers and services for similar things, and not just for kids, throughout North America. So that's one of the other parts to me as an author, again, about giving back, in particular around this time of year.
Great. I will make sure I put some links in there in the show notes, and so people can check those out. And help some kids, as well as get some books.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for having me, Tim. I really appreciated it.
Oh, absolutely. It's been great having you on. So thanks for being here. And if you have anything else you want to plug, I mean, it seems you can do that now. I was about to get to that phase.
All right. Well, let's see. My books are available on Amazon, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, everywhere. And The Wizard Killer Season 1 just came out on Audible, also available on iTunes as an audiobook. And Season 2 is going to be coming out just before Christmas, so we're really excited about that. I've got an absolutely fantastic narrator. And Really, if you're looking for great, clean adventure and inventions, fairy tales made real, great for a kid or adult audience, check out my Yellow Hood series. If you want something that's going to either read like a video game or feel like you're reading a high action movie, check out my series, The Wizard Killer. And then I've got my sci-fi thriller, Man of Cloud 9. And if you go to my website, adamdreece.com, that's Adam, DREECE.com/free samples, you can actually read a few chapters of each one of my books for absolutely free.
All right. And you can find this podcast at mentalcellarpublications.com. You can download us on iTunes or Google Play or wherever you can find podcasts these days. So thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for having me, Tim.